welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 318 of the podcast. And on this episode, I'm talking about JJ Reddick being hired by the Lakers to be their next head coach, and Monty Williams being let go as the head coach of the Detroit Pistons. This week, there were two big head coaching moves made in the NBA. The first was a coach losing his job. Monty Williams was let go by the Detroit Pistons after only one season. Williams had a 6-year, $78 million contract. They will be paying him $65 million not to coach that bad basketball team. Williams is a former coach of the year, leading the Suns to the NBA Finals during the 2021 NBA season. Williams with the Pistons won only 14 games, but hard to argue he underachieved given the talent of that roster. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the Lakers naming JJ Reddick their new head coach, and it's begun a whirlwind of discussion. Did he only get this job because he did a podcast with LeBron James? Did the Lakers go after him because he's a big name due to his work on TV? I watch him on ESPN, and I think he's really insightful about the sport of basketball. Whether or not that will translate on the court, I have no idea. Both of these premier NBA franchises have struggled for a long time to find a long-term head coach. I mean, the Pistons have hired good coaches in Stan Van Gundy and Dwayne Casey, but those guys didn't really work out. In the case of Van Gundy, they gave him ultimate power over the roster, and they were not rewarded with a good basketball team. And then the Lakers fired Frank Vogel, who won the NBA Finals during the bubble season. I just don't get walking away from a coach that soon after winning the NBA Finals. And then with Darvin Ham, they're walking away from a coach who went to the Western Conference Finals. I just don't know how the Lakers view themselves, why they keep walking away from these very good head coaches. Are they top 5 NBA head coaches? No, Frank Vogel is not a Hall of Fame head coach. And again, it didn't work out with Frank Vogel and the Phoenix Suns. But I would call Vogel a steady head coach. You know what you're going to get out of Frank Vogel. In most of his stays in the NBA, he has been consistent. He can coach you to be an above 500 team. But if you are aspiring for more, he might not be your cup of tea. But this is a guy who won the NBA championship as the head coach of the LA Lakers. I mean, in the case of the Pistons, it's hard not to blame the franchise itself. I mean, Dwayne Casey had success with the Toronto Raptors. He was coach of the year. Monty Williams had success with the Phoenix Suns. He was coach of the year. Stan Van Gundy led the Orlando Magic to an NBA Finals appearance. These are established head coaches whose careers all took a bad turn after joining the Detroit Pistons. It's hard to blame them as coaches and not look at the organization and go, what is going on with the Pistons lately? I just think the Pistons have been a complete and utter mess since they lost that core of the 04 team that won the finals. They were a team without a superstar but had stars in Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Rasheed and Ben Wallace, and they've tried to replace them with new stars, but Andre Drummond wasn't it, and Blake Griffin wasn't the same Blake Griffin he was with the LA Clippers. And in the case of the Lakers, I don't really know what the expectations are. Last season, they got swept by a way better Denver Nuggets team. I don't think Darvin Ham did a bad job at all based on his comments. Maybe Anthony Davis wasn't happy. Who knows what LeBron was feeling about his old coach. One thing I like about the hiring of JJ is it does signify that they at least want to attempt to find a long-term head coach. I mean, look at the history of the franchise with Pat Riley and Phil Jackson. Not that I think it's going to be easy for JJ Reddick to become those guys, but I think the Lakers are going to hopefully give him an honest chance to become a really good head coach in this league. The absolute best case scenario for the Lakers is that they found their version of Steve Kerr, who went from the TNT broadcasting booth straight into winning the NBA Finals as head coach of the Warriors. The worst case scenario is that they've hired the next Jason Kidd and Steve Nash with the Nets. The Nets hired those guys off of their playing careers, and those guys did not work with those teams, and those teams were full of NBA stars. The Lakers have LeBron and Anthony Davis. They're not huge expectations. I mean, I've heard people say this is a finals or bust for the Lakers going into next season. That is insane. The Lakers are not as good as the Denver Nuggets. The Lakers are not as good as the LA Clippers. The Lakers are not as good as the Boston Celtics. The Lakers are not as good as the New York Knicks. There are at least 7 to 8 basketball teams way better right now than the LA Lakers. For people like Shannon Sharp to say that the Lakers are in win now mode is ridiculous. I think what the Lakers should strive for is to avoid the play-in tournament. I mean, it seems like every season LeBron and the Lakers are in the in-season tournament. That's not a place I want the best player in basketball to be, or for Anthony Davis to be, to fight to even make it into the postseason. I think the Lakers could possibly become a 50 to 55 win team and avoid the tournament. That's what JJ Reddick should be striving for. Now, that might be a lot to ask for a first-time head coach, but with LeBron James on your team, with Anthony Davis on your team, I think that's fair. But to ask for JJ Reddick to magically make the Lakers better than the Nuggets or the Timberwolves, I think that's ridiculous. I don't even know if they're going to be as good as the Dallas Mavericks next season, who are coming off of a trip to the NBA Finals. I think we need to be way more realistic when it comes to expectations for this current Lakers roster. I mean, I still look at them and I go, they don't really have a point guard. Yes, I know LeBron is one of the best passers in the league, but I think he should be doing less. D'Angelo Russell has these games where you're like, this is the D'Angelo Russell who was with the Nets, and then he's had other games where you're like, oh, this is the D'Angelo Russell who the Minnesota Timberwolves gave up on. I mean, one player on the Lakers I've always been intrigued by is Austin Reeves, because all last season it was the talk about how Darvin Ham wasn't using Austin Reeves correctly, that he should be in the starting lineup. He was in and out of the lineup. He is a very good player. I feel like Laker fans overhype him. I really like him as a basketball player. I'm interested to see if JJ Reddick can get the best out of Austin Reeves. But is he a player who I think has all-star potential? No, but I think he could have a bigger impact on the current Lakers roster. I like the roster that the Lakers have. I like Austin Reeves. I like Rui Hachimura. I think they could be a better regular season team, but do I think this is a team that next season could win the NBA Finals? Absolutely not, and I don't think it has anything to do with the two-star players, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, or JJ Reddick. I just think it has to do with how good the Denver Nuggets are, how good the Minnesota Timberwolves are, how good I think the Clippers are, and how good I think the Dallas Mavericks are. Getting back to the Pistons, what annoys me about them is this should have nothing to do with who your head coach is. Monty Williams being there or not being there has little to no impact. What does have an impact is what is your roster right now, and you don't have a good one. You have one player worth building on, Cade Cunningham, and I still really don't know how to feel about him as a basketball player because he's been playing with a lot of bad players lately. The Pistons are not giving him a fair shot to emerge as a star player in the NBA because we're all ignoring him because nobody wants to watch the Detroit Pistons play basketball games. So who am I to say whether or not he's a franchise player or not? What the Pistons are going to have to do is what every bad basketball team has to do. They have to go into free agency and overpay for a lot of players. And I think the name that they're going to overpay for, and I've already heard the talk, is Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris is a good player, and I feel like he's a bad third option on a team anyway. I didn't like him with the Philadelphia 76ers, but I did like him on the Clippers when he was being coached by Doc Rivers, and I think he actually makes sense on the Pistons as their second leading scorer. I think that makes more sense than him being the fourth option and a guy who you're relying on to hit a big three-point shot after only having 10 shots in the game. I actually think he makes more sense on a team like the Pistons than he does on the Philadelphia 76ers. But sadly, Tobias Harris doesn't move the needle all that much. I mean, he's a guy who's at his best, can be a 20-point scorer, but is he going to help the Pistons go from a 14-win team to a 40-win team? Absolutely not. What the Pistons need to do is go after veteran players who have had postseason success. That is how a young team learns, as they get to play with veterans who have been through it. And a guy like Tobias Harris playing with Cade Cunningham makes a lot of sense to me. Because what the Pistons have to figure out is, do they have the right star in Cade Cunningham? Because this is a team that has had great stars. They've had Isaiah Thomas, one of the best point guards in NBA history. They've had Chauncey Billups, one of the best big shot makers in NBA history. I mean, you just need to find a star and build around them. I think an underrated aspect of being a really good franchise in the NBA is building a culture. The Dallas Mavericks, when I was growing up, had a culture. They had Dirk. You knew that team was going to win 50 to 55 games. The Golden State Warriors have had a culture. The Miami Heat have had a culture. The Pistons in the 2000s had a culture. That's what the best teams have. They have a culture to go along with the talent. I mean, look at the Miami Heat in recent years. They've been to conference finals, they've been to the NBA finals, but people on paper would say they have not been the most talented team in basketball. But what they have is a culture built by Pat Riley, built by Eric Spoelstra. The Pistons right now seriously lack a culture, and they've replaced the Sacramento Kings as the most embarrassing franchise in the league. I mean, the Kings have become respectable again because they have that point guard in De'Aaron Fox, and they have the right head coach in Mike Brown. And people around the league are telling you whose side they're on between the Pistons and Monty Williams. Everyone is on Monty Williams' side. Draymond Green, an active current NBA player, is saying that Monty Williams is walking away from a disaster in the Detroit Pistons. No one is blaming Monty Williams for the current state of the Detroit Pistons. Everyone is telling that franchise to look in the mirror and face their own problems. And yes, I understand teams go through rebuild, but the Pistons have been irrelevant for the longest time. I mean, I grew up watching them be the most consistent team in basketball. What they need to do now is to get back to respectability. Now, here's the difference between the Lakers and the Pistons. When the Lakers were a mess, they were still LA, so they could get stars to come there. They were in a position not unlike the Detroit Pistons, where they were going through a long stretch of not making the playoffs. And then all of a sudden, here comes LeBron James to the LA Lakers, because that is a destination franchise. LeBron is not coming to save the Detroit Pistons anytime soon. No superstar player right now wants to join the Detroit Pistons, so they either need to make a huge trade or develop the next franchise savior, because Paul George is one of the biggest free agents out there right now. He's not picking the Detroit Pistons. If I were Detroit, I would be looking at what's going on with Atlanta. They just traded Javonte Murray, and now Trae Young's future with the Hawks is up in the air. I would make that push. I would make that trade to bring in Trae Young, because that is an exciting player. And I know everyone is down on Trae Young, but I still believe in him in a franchise core player, especially if I'm the Detroit Pistons with absolutely nothing to lose. I mean, he would instantly become their biggest player in the last decade to play for the Detroit Pistons. Maybe Trae wouldn't turn them into a good basketball team, but he would turn them into an interesting basketball team, something they haven't been in a really long time. You can debate all day long whether these two teams, the Lakers and Pistons, are headed in the right direction, and guess what? Everyone is. But what I'm more interested in, what does these two moves have to say about the current state of being a head coach in the NBA? And with the Pistons and Williams, it says to me that teams, for the most part, lack patience and a clear vision. I mean, for a team to give a head coach $80 million and then immediately walk that back, is ridiculous. And listen, like I've been saying, I somewhat to a certain degree understand the Pistons' frustrations. I mean, they've only been to the playoffs twice since 2009. They feel like they need to do things urgently, but this seems like a big mistake, walking away from a guy who everyone thinks is a very good head coach. I know I keep talking about culture, but that's what the Pistons need, a culture change, the way that Tom Thibodeau changed the culture with the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks went from an embarrassing basketball team to an exciting basketball team now with Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, Dante DiVincenzo, Julius Randle. I mean, they are legitimate contending basketball team, and Tom Thibodeau has built up the culture. Since JJ Reddick has become the head coach of the Lakers, there's now a whole new narrative around JJ and the team now that they've drafted LeBron's son Bronny. Whether it's real or not, the consensus thinking is LeBron now has more control over the LA Lakers than ever before. And I don't know if that's a good thing. It could be if his podcast partner Reddick becomes a good coach and his son can play. But what if neither of those things come true? Everyone is going to blame LeBron James. I mean, he could seriously take a hit to his reputation if these things do not become true. If JJ Reddick is a terrible head coach, most people will blame LeBron James. If Bronny James can't even play in the NBA, most people are going to blame LeBron James. I find it really interesting that at this point in his basketball career, LeBron James is willing to put it all on the line like this. And yes, you can make the counter argument that LeBron's always been this way. He once forced the Cavaliers to trade away Andrew Wiggins to bring in Kevin Love. But that's a trade that everyone was on board with because Kevin Love is an all-star basketball player. We have no idea what to expect out of Bronny James. He wasn't all that impressive in college. He was the 55th draft pick in this year's NBA draft. Yes, I get it. He has LeBron James's genes, and I know everyone's making snarky remarks about how he could develop to become the next LeBron, but what are the chances that happened? What if Bronny James can only average about 5 points in 25 minutes? LeBron is the one who's going to take the hit. No one's going to blame Bronny James, and no one's going to blame JJ Reddick. They're going to blame LeBron James. And I feel like I say this next thing every single podcast I talk about the Lakers. Are they really thinking about life after LeBron? Rob Pelinka brings in JJ Reddick, who is a young head coach. Yes, he should be the head coach of the Lakers after LeBron is there, but if he's no good, he's not going to be there. The same for Bronny James. Yes, drafting a player like that, he should be in the league after his father is done playing basketball. But if he's a bad basketball player, that won't be the case. Remember when everyone was making a big deal about Doc Rivers coaching his son Austin Rivers? LeBron James and Bronny James is going to take that debate to a whole nother level. Every single minute the two of them are on the basketball court together, it is going to be mainstream news. The media is going to talk about it nonstop. It's going to be all ESPNs of the world want to talk about. It's going to be the only thing Skip Bayless is ever going to want to talk about is LeBron James and Bronny James and whether or not Bronny James is any good at basketball. And after listening to this podcast, if you are looking at both of these situations that the Pistons and Lakers have put themselves in and saying that they are dysfunctional, I fully agree. Even if you want to defend the Lakers and say they should do anything and everything to keep LeBron James and make him happy, I somewhat understand that because he's a big star and the Lakers need a big star. But are they really thinking about their future? Is JJ Reddick going to be their head coach 5 seasons from now? Because if he's not, I'm going to look at this as an utter failure. And for the Pistons, absolutely no one is on their side with them firing Monty Williams because Monty Williams has had more success in the last decade of basketball than the Detroit Pistons have. That's the reality of the situation. He's a coach who has recently been to the NBA Finals. They are a basketball team who has only been to the playoffs twice since 2009. Who's looking at the Pistons going, oh, they know what they're doing right now? Absolutely no one. I feel bad for whoever is going to be the next head coach of the Detroit Pistons, and I am somewhat rooting for JJ Reddick and the Lakers because I think it's an interesting story. I like JJ Reddick as an analyst, and I think that he is a good basketball mind, but I want to see if he really is one. And I want LeBron James to make the playoffs in the last few seasons he's in the league. I mean, that's what we all should want, is to have arguably the best basketball player on the biggest of stages, and that's the NBA playoffs, not the play-in tournament. That needs to stop. I just personally find it really fascinating that superstar players want to be coached by non-experienced coaches. I mean, look at LeBron's history with them. He was coached by Tyronn Lue. That was successful because they won the NBA Finals. Now this is a whole nother thing. I mean, JJ Reddick has not been an assistant. He's been a broadcaster on ESPN. I guess you could argue it worked out with the Warriors when they hired Mark Jackson and when they hired Steve Kerr, but broadcasters becoming coaches is a really interesting thing that's happening in the NBA right now, and I wonder if it's going to continue to happen. I think a lot of this is a case study. If it works out for JJ Reddick, many more will copy. I'll end on this note. I'm really interested to see where these two teams are in the next 5 years and whether or not we're still having the same conversations we're having right now about the Pistons and the Lakers, or are these teams going to get their act together? I feel somewhat positive about the Lakers. I don't like the vibes right now with the Detroit Pistons. Everything seems off about that franchise. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.